Today, I have the great pleasure of speaking with Gijs Hillmann, as he's known in the US, and Gijs Hillmann in the Netherlands. We're going to talk about cultural diversity. We're going to talk about cultural differences in the business. He has a fascinating journey and experience. I hope you'll enjoy my conversation with Gijs Hillmann. Hello and welcome to a new episode of the Business of Meeting podcast. And today, we're going to talk about cultural diversity, about working with different cultures in the same organization. And I'm extremely happy to be speaking with Gijs Hillmann from a company CultureBeatz. Gijs has been working for many, many years in the international environment. And also for you to know, it's not Gus, it's Gijs Hillmann. But I guess I'm one of the rare that can pronounce it in the States. So Gus, thank you so much for taking the time today.
Eric, thanks very much for having me on the podcast. I'm really looking forward to speaking to you and to sharing some thoughts around cultural diversity.
That's awesome. We're not going to speak in Dutch. Het is bijna 7 jaar, ik heb geen Nederlands gesproken. Maar bon, we are from neighboring countries originally.
Absolutely.
And we're going to speak as well about the migrant workers, which I am one of them. So I can't wait to dig into that.
Absolutely.
Awesome. So before we actually speak about that, I'd like to know, what is your journey? What is Gijs' journey? And how did you come up to work in training people in cultural diversity?
Brilliant. Eric, a very good question. And it's a long journey, so I'm going to just cut it up into small little parts. So the first thing is my parents are Dutch, but I wasn't born in the Netherlands. Like many stories, mine went overseas. My father was a mining engineer, and I was actually born on the copper belt in Zambia, on the border with Zaire.
Wow.
So in a large mining town, far away from the Europe that my parents grew up in, but enjoying myself. Spent a number of years there, moved back to the Netherlands, and my parents struggled to readjust in the Netherlands. So after 2 years, they went back. They had a choice. Where do we go? Mining, you can go all over the world, but they settled back in Africa. They enjoyed Africa. They liked it. They liked the cultures, the diversity.
Yeah.
Of course, the climate helps a lot if you're coming from the Netherlands. And I spent the next 9 years living and growing up further in Namibia. And then moved from Namibia to South Africa. So got into
Where in Namibia? Swakopmund?
Well, if you've been to Swakopmund, beautiful place. No, just outside the capital, Windhoek. Yeah. For a number of years, small mining community. I actually went to school in Windhoek as well. And my journey was a very eventful one. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed the multinational, the diversity of cultures, particularly in Namibia. And that was one of the defining moments of my life, because I moved from that multicultural environment when I was 14 to South Africa. And all of a sudden, I came into an environment sort of at the end days of apartheid in South Africa, 88, 89. And I moved to probably one of the most conservative towns in South Africa at that stage. Went for my final few years of school there, went into the military, which is a long story on its own, and actually experienced close-hand sort of the different view of diversity that was prevalent at that stage. And was fortunate enough to be in the military at the time when we actually had the first referendum to decide on the free elections. But it was an absolute contrast. You know, you'd come from Namibia, which is a very multicultural, different languages, everybody trying to integrate into what was then a country going through a lot of throes of civil upheaval. Spent a number of years still in South Africa, finished off schooling, and then came back to the Netherlands actually as an immigrant to decide to work on the lines, just to get some money in and then go work further or whatever the case may be. And all of a sudden, this kid from a pretty privileged position started working shoulder to shoulder on the lines in the logistics environment, in warehousing, supply chain, with a lot of people with the origin that came from primarily Poland at that stage. I lived on the labor migrant locations, so lived in the bungalow parks with primarily Polish colleagues for a year and a half, almost 2 years, and spent the next 18 years after that working for an international labor migration company, so a large temporary agency that specialized specifically in taking people from Eastern Europe to Western Europe, and grew up with them, developed with them, learned with them, saw the change all the way through from 2001 to 2019, saw Polish people coming into the Netherlands first. After that, people from Czech, from Slovakia, later Romania, Bulgaria, Lithuania, multiple other countries, but primarily all migrant workers, economic migrants who came to work for a temporary period over in the Netherlands. Now, growing up with them and developing with them, I saw a number of things. I became a corporate trainer in 2010 and spent a long time dealing with some of the blue chip clients in the Netherlands, talking about diversity and how you integrate people from different cultures onto the work floor, how you make sure that you get your objectives met, but at the same time, you keep people happy, you understand each other, you communicate better, and you work better together. And just to round off that journey, what actually happened was I spent so many times walking on the work floor and seeing that people just do not understand each other. They do not understand where they're coming from. They do not understand the background, their differences in communication. But above all, there's a difference in fundamental understanding that all of us are human. All of us have the same capacities and capabilities. And particularly that economic migrants, as in other migrants, get a very raw deal in the process. And there are two quotes that came to my mind and that have haunted me actually since probably about 2010. And they're two quotes that both are originally from Lech Walesa of Solidarność, who later became the Polish president. And the first is his most famous one. And if you ask anybody who comes from Poland, they'll laugh, they'll know the quote immediately. And in Polish, that quote is "Nie chcę, ale muszę," which means I don't want to, but I have to. You know, it was his response to why do you do the things that you do? Why do you go against the regime? Why do you fight against the system, etc.? And his quote was always, "There's something that drives me. There's something bigger than me that drives me." And as I saw the struggles that people had to integrate onto the work floor, but also the struggles that operational leaders across all the sectors had to actually integrate with the people, that started becoming a rallying call for me. And the second thing is a quote that he shared, which basically translates to, "We can hold our head high because we have paid the price for freedom." And that price or freedom is priceless. Now, Eric, when you're talking about being an economic migrant, when you're talking about being a migrant in general terms, you know, you pay a massive price. You leave family behind, you leave your way of life behind. In many cases, we leave studies behind, university educations. You leave a whole system, a whole context of being behind to come and work in a different country for whatever reason that you might be there, whether it's an economic one, a social reason, fleeing from war, persecution, whatever the case may be. Now, my firm belief is that when I am working with people who come from another country, so economic migrants, I need to treat them in such a way that they do not pay that price for freedom twice. The first time in leaving their place of origin, and the second time by being here on the work floor, perhaps not understood, perhaps not respected, and perhaps not appreciated for the journey and the information that they have. Knowing full well that a lot of people on the work floor speak multiple languages, that have got a background, that have got a professional experience, but because of a different context are unable to express themselves and therefore often treated in a menial way. So that's my story, my background.
You remind me of an experience in my life where between 2 years college, I had the opportunity to actually work as a blue collar. in the factory that was producing the cars, Renault in Brussels. It was pulling electric cables. And I remember clearly there are people from different walk of life, and they had different motivation to work there. And one was, the father died and had three siblings, and he had to work to pay for them to make studies. So it was absolutely honorable. I want to come back to something you said about diversity. Okay, and as you know, I'm in the U.S. I'm a U.S. citizen, and this podcast, although is now listened to in over 50 countries in the world, believe it or not, the majority of the listeners are in the U.S. And the word diversity has a different meaning on both sides of the pound. And remember doing a thesis on cultural differences in business, actually studying the work of two of your co-citizens, Geert Hofstede and Frans Trompenaars, about cultural differences. But diversity, sorry?
Absolutely well known to me. Legends in the field.
I'm sure legend, absolutely. The true legend. But the word diversity is different, had a different meaning in Europe than it is in the US. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, I can give you my perspective, and bearing in mind my perspective is a perspective.
Sure.
On the term. So diversity is much larger and more encompassing than just what we would be referring to in my first talk about myself, which is a cultural diversity and the diversity of people coming from different backgrounds, different cultures, different nationalities, different languages, and possibly a different view on life based on that. But diversity is so much more than that. Diversity also encompasses areas like generational diversity, the diversity of genders as well, the diversity of value systems or belief systems, or even the diversity of expression when it comes to your gender identity and so forth. So that diversity that I'm talking about is a part of the entire microcosm of diversity. But it counts for exactly the same, I think, and I believe. Because the second that I am not curious about you, about your background, about the unique perspective and unique angle that you bring, I'm doing two things. The first is I'm very much limiting my ability to reach out to a larger audience. So let's take the meetings industry as an example.
Yep.
If I approach a meeting from a perspective that I'm going to just make it for a homogenous single group or single identity of people, and I'm not listening to all the other factors and influences and generations and different ways of looking at things, I'm going to end up with a very two-dimensional, flat type of meeting. It's not going to be rich. It's not going to be that tapestry. So when we're talking about diversity, at least the way that I see it from my limited perspective, is that we need to talk in a way that not only encompasses the broader aspect of all that we are as human beings, but we also need to credit those aspects and understand that we cannot just talk on one level, or we cannot just do meetings on one level. It's such a large field. There's no way, even on the podcast, that we could get to that.
Correct.
Because we haven't touched the diversity either of people that might have hearing challenges or seeing challenges. How do they move in the world that we've created for the majority, where we need to start taking into account what other groups require and need?
Yeah, I agree with you. Now, for the listener, can we maybe get into what you do for companies that are having in Europe those different culture to actually open their eyes and basically make them work better, which obviously is better for the organization and the company. But what do you do concretely? Let's say I'm to take your example, I'm coming from Poland and I'm now working in a company in the Netherlands. What's happening?
That's a brilliant question, Eric. So I try and attack it on multiple levels. I think that if you are going to challenge one aspect of any business, you need to understand the context of the larger business and to nibble at it from different angles. So the first thing that I do is I run training programs to help not only people who've migrated to a new country or to a new environment to deal with the challenges in that area, but I also help operational leaders to understand what type of person have they actually got in front of them. What are their needs, their requirements? How are they going to respond to negotiations? How do they respond to coaching? How do they respond to leadership issues, et cetera, et cetera. On the other side, I also train HR leaders across the board and across the globe on what exactly do they need to put into place to ensure that we have workplaces that are equitable, that are good, and that mean that or that ensure that everybody who's at that workplace can have a voice and can add to that tapestry of work, as it were, if I can put it that way. So it's partially training, it's partially consulting, it's partially speaking. Every now and then, I'm the person who haunts your dreams at night to say, we are not quite there yet with your company. I talk about it, I blog about it, I try and catch the ears of people that are shaping companies as well, and ask them to be reminiscent of the fact that shaping and changing a company culture is not just a case of change management, but it's about doing the right thing for a larger group of people than just what you're currently dealing with.
Got it. So taking the example of the person coming from another country being there, so there's a part of training for the company so that they remain open, that this tapestry of work that you mentioned. What about the person who's actually coming to the country to work in a company? What do you do with them? What do you tell them?
I try and show them that one of their biggest challenges is going to be to fit into an environment that is actually not waiting for them. And let me clarify that and let me phrase that specifically. That environment is calling out to you to come and give of your services, to come and give of your time and to make sure that my product is being moved from A to B. But that's the limit. That's the limitation of the expectation from that side. The environment is not ready yet to accept the baggage that you've brought with you, the rucksack that you've brought with you, and the experience that they've brought with you. So literally what the environment is going to do, unless we take a look at the environment, is to say, Eric, you're a migrant, bring your hard work, but leave everything else behind. And that's usually what happens in the world of work. So there's too little consideration of who Eric is beyond the fact that he's just moving product from A to B or order picking or running those electric cables, et cetera, et cetera. So what I try and do is to ensure that you, Eric, are able to converse with them and to show them exactly who you are beyond the job that you're doing. But I also ensure that the company understands that Eric is not just that pipe fitter or that logistics expert or whatever the case, but Eric has a background, he has a context, he has a way of looking at the world that is different. And if we tap into that way that Eric looks at the world, we can make the workplace not only a more interesting place to be, but we can also do business together and lead to a more conducive work environment.
Got it. Are you also tackling things like perception of time being different, distance to hierarchy being different, or all those elements?
Absolutely. So we'll look at polymorphic and dimorphic times. We'll look at aspects of hierarchy. I will help them as well in dealing with why on earth are my people saying or nodding yes, but they're not doing exactly what I'm saying, What I really try and do is make sure that people understand that if I approach you in the way that I'm used to being dealt with, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be as open as you could be, because that might be a challenge. So, Eric, you yourself have that experience in the States and in Belgium, and you know the differences in culture that you have there. And exactly the same, the Dutch pride themselves on being absolutely the most direct communicators on the planet. We love it. We think it's absolutely brilliant. And then we start dealing with other cultures, and those cultures look at us and they think, hang on a second, you guys are very direct and very rude. You are questioning and challenging leaders right in a meeting in front of everybody else. We would never do that in the country that I'm from. So I look at every aspect, which is why I don't run a bespoke or a standardized program. I do bespoke work for each of the clients that I'm dealing with.
I understand. There's a fabulous book called Taken for a Ride, where they explained was supposed to be a merger, but the acquisition of Chrysler by Daimler and the cultural differences between Germany and the US. That's absolutely phenomenal.
Yep, absolutely. And the thing is, we sort of make light of it and we think, oh, it'll be all right. So that's a car maker. We're a car maker. We're just going to manage,
Yep.
To be very honest, even in the States, there are massive cultural differences. If you were to take just two companies that are looking at dealing with each other, and the ones from Detroit as an example, the capital of cars, and let's say that you have a company from Portland in Oregon, you're going to have massive diversity of thought and differences of looking at things, and those are going to lead to some inherent challenges down the line, whether it be in the form of leadership that you have on the work floor, the types of communication, your marketing, the coaching that you do, et cetera, et cetera.
Absolutely.
My role is just to add in a little bit of a stone and to bring some sanity where there's insanity at times.
Yeah, to your point, I'm trying to teach all the New Yorkers that are coming to Florida how to live here. No, seriously speaking, I'm also passionate with the cultural differences in business. Nevertheless, although I pride myself in having studied, applying it, working in different over 50 countries in the world, when I moved my family to the US, stupid thing like the first floor. So we were looking at renting a condo with the family. So I called from Belgium and the landlord and said, I want to have the condo on the second floor. And she said, oh, I thought you wanted to the first floor. I said, sorry. I said, I want to have the condo on the ground floor. Oh, she said, I thought you wanted on the first floor. I said, no. I have a little one. I don't want her to trip in the stairs. So that's why I want to have the ground floor. And she said, yeah, so you want the first floor? I said, no. Your person here told me that you wanted the first floor. I said, well, that person is wrong. I want the ground floor. Until it hit me. And I say, hold on. What do you call the first floor? Is it the floor the same level as of the cars are parking? And she said, yes, what I'm telling you, the first floor. I said, okay, because in Belgium, the first floor is actually the second floor. Absolutely. So even if you're aware of it, that's the problem, is that you don't think about it and you fell into that trap.
Absolutely. I think that's so relevant to understand even those little nuances, because in the meetings industry, it's going to be exactly the same. You're not going to deal particularly with a meeting or a client that is mostly from your town. You're going to be looking at having people that come from elsewhere, or perhaps are flying in there, people to attend the convention or whatever you're setting up, that may come from totally different places. And at best, if there's a conflict of thought or some sort of communication issue, it'll lead to a few laughs. It may lead to a bit of irritation or whatever. But at worst, it could lead to a loss of business, a loss of revenue, or in many cases, it can lead to esteem or some sort of faux pas that might cost you quite a bit of money to turn around.
Absolutely. And sometimes, it's the most simplest thing, like you would not know that you're insulting the person in front of you. When we used to cross our legs in the meeting and show the sole of our shoe. If you do that in the Middle East, you're basically insulting the person in front of you without even knowing it. So, we're talking about safe place, safe environment. Every time, and I know that is something that you are very familiar with. Every time I hear about that, I'm thinking, there is no safe environment. There's safe people that are creating a safe little environment for the people around, whether it's a team or maybe a conference. But that's what the people are making it. So my question to you is, in the context of a meetings, a conference, an event, talking about cultural differences, what would you advise people that are planning it and people that are running those conferences to create a safe environment where people would be aware of those cultural differences and will also understand the other better, and obviously the outcome would be more positive?
I think the most important thing is to be intensely curious about the people that you're getting across the work for, whether those are your audience members, your speakers, your hosts, convention attendees, but also be very curious about the people that are serving your customers in terms of the serving environment, in terms of the background of people. So be curious. Try and look beyond only we're doing a meeting for that sort of environment, but look, who is actually going to be arriving? Who's going to be speaking? Are there any cultural issues that I should be aware of or that I can integrate? And Eric, it's small things. We're all aware, don't insult somebody on purpose. I think we've moved way beyond that, okay? But be aware that if there's somebody coming in that might have a different background, they would enjoy or they would love to be greeted in their own tongue or to have an example spoken about. So I know that there's a drive and a move for convention organizers, and particularly for professional speakers who do work a lot with the meetings industry, to be very sensitive to what is the background of the people in the audience. So I'll give an example. Let's say that you are hosting an audience in Chicago. The one thing that you do not want to be talking about is relevant examples from New York. You want to walk the streets around first. You want to talk about, okay, I saw this in Chicago. This is where I'm coming from. This is my example that I'm using. So tailor it to your audience. Now, in terms of diversity and in terms of sensitivity, you can do exactly that. Be curious about the people that are going to be in your audience, tailor your message to your audience, tailor your conference to your audience, and make sure that people spend more time focusing in on what you are trying to achieve rather than on the questions they have, like, do I feel comfortable here? Do I feel accepted here? Do I feel like this is a place where I can belong and relax? If we can move beyond that and make through bringing in an inclusive environment, bring that into the meetings industry, we're going to just triple the outcome of the effort that we put in. And if I look at the meetings industry as an external person, there is so much work being done. It would be sad if we're not sensitive and then lose that connection with people because of that insensitivity.
Correct. I want to give two quick personal examples linked to that. And then I want to ask you the last part of conversation about how could people learn and how could they prepare themselves. But the first example is we had a sales meeting for a pharmaceutical company in Lisbon. And the keynote speaker was a very well-known professor from a very well-known top university in the US. Was speaking on sales and motivation. Didn't want to be brief, thought that he knew everything. The audience was basically the salespeople from all over Europe, from that pharmaceutical company. So besides the people from England, nobody was English native. And he went on, after 5 minutes, he lost everyone because he started taking example from the baseball game. Lost everyone. Even the Brits who prefer the cricket. But he lost everyone. And the second example that I want to share with you, and more for the listener, kind of bringing everything up together. So you grew up in Zambia as well. You're from the Netherlands. And we were organizing actually an incentive trip for a company with all their clients from the Benelux. So Belgium, Netherlands, and Luxembourg. And I want to give that example just to illustrate the cultural differences, especially for my friends here in North America, so they understand what's at stake here. And we were at Elephant Hills, the hotel at Victoria Falls, at the border with Zambia. And for whatever reason, the people from the Netherlands were arriving the day after. So on the first day, I was there just with the people from Belgium. And there are two bars in the hotel Elephant Hills. And you know where I'm going with this. The Flemish were in one bar, and the Walloon, the French-speaking people, were on the other bar for the first evening. The second night, when the Dutch had arrived, all the Belgians were together in one bar, and all the Dutch were together at the other bar. Such small distance, such small countries, and so many cultural differences.
Absolutely.
But anyway, there's more to say about that later on. But I want to end that with the conversation with you by asking, how could people prepare themselves? What can they read? How can they prepare themselves, be aware of that when they're planning a meeting and when they are attending a conference where they're going to meet people from all over the world?
Eric, I think my answer would be stop reading.
Okay.
If I can be very honest. Now, I love books, like you love books in the background as well. And I think there's a lot to be learned. But I think the most important thing that you can do is become intensely curious. So I'm going to move it away from the meetings industry for a second and then jump back to the meetings industry. So one of the first things that I will tell the people at my clients is say, right, how long have you been working with Group X? And that may be, from a different region internally in the country, or maybe from a different country whatsoever. And they'll say, well, I've been working with them for 4 years. And I'll say, how often have you sat at a table with people from that region or from that country in the canteen and just sat and chatted to them about their background, their favorite sports, et cetera, et cetera? I mean, sports, a brilliant example, what you gave about baseball. If I'm in Poland, I might chat about football, but I'll probably wait and see what is actually happening in the ice hockey or in the ski jumping, because that's going to be much more relevant. Okay, and there's much more pride in that. So don't put your nose in books. I mean, they're brilliant websites and they're brilliant books to get all these cultural differences out, Pat. But go and ask, be at the coal front, go and speak to people. The meetings industry, like most industries, but even more than most industries, is one of relationships. Relationships in which we do fun things together and show the world exactly what we can achieve together. I mean, that's the meetings industry for me.
Correct.
As somebody who moves in and out of the meetings industry. It's a wonderful world. It's a dynamic world. But let's not make it technical. Let's not make it theoretical. A thesis is a good thing, but the best thing is just me to come up to you, Eric, and say, what's your background? Where are you coming from? What makes you proud about coming from that area? What are your favorite memories of that area? What is their favorite food? What is that smell that you smell and then it brings tears to your eyes and, a lump to your throat, because that just means so much, because that's what babushka made or mama made, or, those are the fundamental questions we should be asking. And then move from there and say, hey, how would you feel if I incorporated that as part of my meeting? Or if I, considered the fact that a third of my audience are from French-speaking Wallonia in Belgium? Can I do anything? Can I add in extra hors d'oeuvres? Or can I, perhaps bring a drink that will bring a smile into there, Let's not have the standard Starbucks coffee, with all due respect to the Starbucks. Let's have coffee with amaretto in it.
Yep.
Okay. Do that sort of thing. The small touches. It's the small things that people appreciate. And just having that conversation is the best way to get started.
I love it. I cannot agree more. The books are interesting. You can learn a lot, but the implementation is by talking with people and asking them questions. Absolutely. Gus, Gijs, thank you very much. How do people get in touch with you?
Eric, the very best way is just to pop over to the website of CultureBeatz with a Z. That's probably the best. Look me up on LinkedIn. Follow your podcasts. Look back at these. I've loved the conversation that we've had. More than that, I've loved looking at the podcasts and the interviews that you've done with people. The culture of the meeting industry is stunning. Just follow along and pop over for a conversation. Don't feel beholden. Just pop over for a conversation and let's talk about all the fun things that happen with different cultures.
Awesome. Guys, thank you very much. Hartelijk bedankt en doei.
Graag gedaan. Houdoe.
Gijs, thank you very much for sharing your journey with me today. Fascinating. And I cannot only agree with you, but really recommend to everyone, read, yes, and speak, ask question. That's where you're going to get the best outcome when it comes to working with the people from different cultures and actually people from all over the world, as a matter of fact. Ladies and gentlemen, if you want to connect with me, please go on LinkedIn or join my Facebook group, eventbusinessformula.com/group. And if you enjoyed this conversation, please share it with your network. Thank you. Bye-bye.